gentlemen, you're all very welcome here this evening to St. Columba's Church here in Tullow for this lecture on the history of Tullow. My name is Richard Codd, for those of you who don't know me. I happen to be the president of the Carlow Historical and Archaeological Society, but my term of office is quickly coming to an end because the 3-year term will be finished next week when we have our AGM, and I might mention a little bit more about that later on. But it's a great pleasure at the end of that term and at the end of the lectures for the year that I have the privilege of introducing Christopher McQuinn to give us the lecture for May on the history of Tullow. And he actually chose this building in order as a venue for giving it. It's a venue that I happen to know very well because it's part of our group of parishes. And on several Sundays during the year, I'm up here maybe conducting morning prayer, and I kind of would like to have a congregation like this every time. But anyway, it's great, and you're all very, very welcome. It's a beautiful. Maybe I'm biased, but I think it's a lovely building, and we've got some lovely stained glass. Not a huge amount, but some nice stained glass. And there's this particular monument which belonged to the previous church. And maybe Christy will mention something about that later on, I'm not quite sure. But it's a very historical site here in the town of Tullow. And it's, as I say, a building I like very, very much. But you're all very, very welcome here, and thank you all for coming. And it's a real delight to introduce Christy McQuinn. Christy, as you all know, former principal of Tullow Community School, and has given lectures before for the Carlow Historical Society, is a member of the Society, and has done many articles and research on the history of Tullow and the environs. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Christy McQuinn.
Thank you, Richard, President. I must say I've been a wonderful president for the last 3 years, and it's always been a pleasure to be at lectures that you have been involved in. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honoured to be here tonight, and I'm grateful to the Select Vestry for the opportunity to give this talk in such a historically appropriate surroundings. Now, somebody said to me there during the week, are you going to get through 4,500 years in 50 minutes? So you'll probably know at the end whether I do or not, whether I do succeed. We'll try anyway. Now, Rathgall, 2,500 before Christ. There's probably about 2,000 years of history there. And it's probably one of the most important archaeological and historical sites in the whole of the country, maybe in the whole of the British Isles or Europe. And it's only been really discovered in the last number of years. This man here, Professor Barry Rafferty, I remember him well in Tullow. He started in the late 1960s excavating out at Rathwood. He stayed in the town here in Bridie Forest Hills down on Tullow Beg. And he basically did wonderful work with just a FOSS group working with him. I'm moving on.
You're there, Christy. You're there.
Oh, yes. Now, 2011, I was out there myself and I happened to see this group there, and I asked them who they were, and they told me that they were from UCD Archaeology School, and that they were basically completing Barry's work. Now, Barry unfortunately died of cancer in 2000. What did I say year there?
2000.
Yeah, 2011. But he was dead at this stage anyway, and he intended writing a book, and he had started but never finished. And the work was taken on by Dr. Katrina Becker. She's in UCC, and she has completed the book. I'll show it to you at the end. These are the sort of things they found out in Rathwood: glass beads, everything of a very, very high Rathgall or other, and gold coils, silver, all sorts of jewellery, different things. We're getting something like 400 items a day there. Now, not only is Rathgall one of the most important sites, ring forts. They found in 2018 by satellite imagery that Tullow Hill was a ring fort as well. Tullow Hill, of course, is where Tullow was built upon, and there were supposed to be two ditches there. I can't remember what the two ditches are, but I think they're those ones here. And it was a particularly dry summer, so they got that photograph there. And these are all the ring forts and hill forts that are in the area. There's Tullow Hill, there's Knockeen, or there's Knocklow rather, Knockeen and Rathgall. And basically, they're all kind of the same distance from one another, and they're all very, very important for defence and war and so on. Back to that because it's just something more about it. These places basically were involved with a lot of bronze casting, Iron Age, glass, and even creations. And they maintain in the book that most of the people lived in Knockeen or Knockeen there and went on to work as a station here in Rathgall. And look, there are lots of standing stones in the area. This is probably one of the most prominent. It's out there in O'Toole's and Rathglass. There are two of them together. This one actually has the Ohm. Now, Ohm was kind of around the time of before St. Patrick, and strangely enough, that when they translated this one, this says Dona Deus Maci Mariani, which means of Donad, son of Marianus. And the item about that is that's an Irish name and that's a Latin name. So they reckon that this has something to do with maybe there were some Roman influences in the area before St. Patrick came. Now, why is Tullow so important? Well, it's one of the most ancient historical route bears of Ireland, from the hill of Tara, and this is called the Shlí Column. It comes down through Tala, right down through Baltinglass, right down to Tullow, down towards Gore's Bridge, down to Old Ross, and down to Waterford. And of course, that's mainly the N81 at the moment. So it is, and there were 5 main routes from Tara. In the Eskers of the Castlemore there is one of the most famous. Now, as you often heard at school, there was no real overall power in Ireland. There were a lot of small kingdoms called Tuas. And the one that was around here was the O'Kinsellas, or the O'Kinsella were the dynasty around here in the 5th century. And a son of the O'Kinsella called Famine was an ancestor of the O'Félmada sept, and Tullow was the capital of the northern O'Félmada. So therefore, if you look at this here, you'll see there's the O'Kinsella, this sort of thing, and then a division of them was the northern O'Félmada and the southern O'Félmada, and Tullow was about here. And the capital of that dynasty was Tullow O'Félmada. Now, we come on to Rathvilly, and one of the O'Félmada, his father was Criffin, or maybe his brother, King of Leinster in 415. This is the mural taken in St. Patrick's Church in Rathvilly, and there St. Patrick baptising the King of Leinster. Now, I think his brother was the O'Félmada that Tullow was called after. His father was Éanna O'Kinselly, and he was very anti-Patrick. And in fact, when Patrick tried to land at Arklow, he wouldn't let him. So he eventually had to go up towards the Boyne and down to Trim and so on. But his son converted. And that's the well in Rathvilly where he's believed to have been baptised. And of course, Ireland was full of holy wells. This is a map that shows all the dots there, the holy wells all over Ireland. Of course, they were from pagan times, and they were regarded as kind of a way into the other world. And of course, when the Christians came, they Christianized them and they used them for baptism. The baptisms in churches only happened in a later time. Not in those times, they used to be baptized in rivers and in pools. And there's the one in Tullow, which is Our Lady's Well out on the Ballymurphy Road. And that's the one that's in the St. Austin's Abbey. The one out the Ballymurphy Road is supposed to have curing properties. The one here is not claimed to have any. And that's St. Catherine's Well, it's in Castlemore. And it's very interesting, that one, in the grounds of Eustace Duckett's place there, or Eustace rather. It's St. Catherine actually is St. Catherine of Alexandria, which is in Egypt. And there was great devotion to her in Ireland at the time, and they called it out there Catherine's Well. St. Fortune was a grandson of the High King of Ireland, or grandson of Niall and the hostages, and son of King Lear and a Welsh princess, Scotland. Now, he was converted in Trim by St. Loman, a nephew of St. Patrick, and that's the River Boyne. You see, when St. Patrick wasn't allowed to land at Arklow, he went up along the Boyne, left his boat on the Boyne, and he then, St. Fortune was coming along and he heard St. Loman singing the Psalms or something like that, and he asked him about it, and he explained Christianity, and he and his family. His mother was a Welsh princess, Scotland. Now that's St. Patrick's Cathedral, Church of Ireland Cathedral in Trim. The rector there was the Reverend Robert Jones, who was a class pupil of mine, taught him honours maths up in the school. He's retired now, he's up in Rathvilly. This is a mosaic in the Catholic Church there, and it shows St. Patrick in the boat going up the Trim. That's St. Fortune's Well in Killutranon, which is down near Bagnus in Marshall Parish. And you see, when St. Loman, who was the Bishop of Trim, died, St. Fortune then was made bishop, and he only lasted 3 days as bishop, and he then decided to become a hermit and went down to this place here in Killutranon, and eventually then he actually came to Tullow. So that's the 10th or 11th century church, because the original churches would have been wooden churches. And that's in Boris stained glass window, because St. Fortune was a famous craftsman working particularly in metalwork, and you can see various religious items there on the floor that he's working at the forge there. St. Patrick's Bell and Shrine in the National Museum. St. Fortune was one of the 3 blacksmiths that St. Patrick had. So basically, that St. Patrick's Bell could have been made by him, I don't know. And there's a monk ringing a bell, and that's a roundabout up in Trim. Now, if you come into the church here, you'll pass by 2 items. This one, which is the baptismal font, and this one, which was the base of a Celtic cross. When St. Fortune came to Tullow, they're not quite sure where he actually had his. He came as a hermit, and the hermit then became a scholar, and he became a school, and he began to teach scripture, and he began to teach metalwork here in Tullow. So it possibly was here on this site. Some other people have said Cross Row or down the Ballymurphy Road, I don't know. And now, one of his pupils was St. Finian of Clonard, who was extremely famous. And I don't know if you read this, but I'll actually read out for you. He was a native of Michael. He was placed under the care of Fortune until about age 30, and then he went to Wales and he studied under Saints Sadok, Caddock and Gildas in Wales. He returned to Ireland and he founded monasteries at Hull, Money, and the very famous one, Clonard, right in the centre of Ireland. He is known as the teacher of the Irish saints and the spiritual father of 3,000 monks, which included the 12 apostles of Ireland. And he founded a Hull there, Monastic church, and it was linked with the, founded by St. Penal, linked with the 11th century religious house founded by St. Fortune in Tullow, and Church of Ireland still is connected with the parish of Hull. Now, St. Rena was a sister of St. Finian, and her feast day is the 18th of December. She had 3 sisters. Other sisters, St. Common and St. Crowan of Ardenhu, which is on the way out to Carlow, up back road there, Blackstone Road, which is Callinega, which means the cell of the daughters of Hugh. And she, St. Renoch, had sons, and her sons were also Saints McConnell, who succeeded St. Finian in Clonard, and Saint that nobody has held about, St. Garvon of Kilmagarvol, which means the church of my young Garvon, which we call Kill out the road about 3 miles out of Rathvilly. So Kilmagarvol means the church of my young Garvon, and they call it with an Og at the end of it, it's kind of a term of reflection. And his feast day is the 26th of March. Now that's Kilmagarvol house today, and I think the Bulgers live there, various people have lived there. The Brunburys have lived there at one stage, the Bulgers, and I think the Murphys, yes, the famous business family here in Tullow. And by the way, just on that particular one, in Comfort said when the 1839 Ordnance Survey map showed a site of a graveyard, and all traces of the church and graveyard have disappeared. Now, the linking of St. Patrick with St. Columkill, and you'll find Patrick died 461. A pupil of his was Fortune 500, pupil of his was Finian, died 549, and Columkill died 595. And Columkill and Fortune were descended from 9 of the 9 hostages. There was also a niece of St. Fortune called Lazarus. She was a niece, and she was educated at Clonard by St. Finian, and she was placed under the care of St. Kieran later on Tom McNoyes. She studied scripture and spent time in the convent with Finian's sister, which we met her before St. Rena, before founding her own convent. And she was buried in Castlemore, and her feast day is 29th of March, 15th of September. This is another female saint, another patron of Tullow. St. Fortune is a patron of Tullow as well. And she belonged to the tribe called Edurneir from North Leinster, and they lived as nuns in Tullow, it's mentioned in those books, Ballymote and Lecken, and her relics were preserved in Tullow. Now, this is another patron of Tullow. St. Fortune was a Welsh disguised as Scottish, and he was one of the 7 beautiful sons of Angus to come to Ireland from Scotland. He was a disciple of St. Columkill. He was the abbot of Bangor, County Down. Tulloch Fortune, which Tullow was called at one stage, Tullow after St. Fortune, and Drumcliff, where Gates is buried in Sligo. And he's also associated with Ballyhorn, County Down, and Kiltiernan in County Dublin. And again, he has the Mo in front of his name, Mohiona, my young Tornan. Died in 634. And his feast day is the 12th of June, and he's mentioned in a lot of the old books. He said to have written, St. Columkill wrote a poem about Tornan. He featured in a poem by St. Moling, and he's mentioned in the Martyrology of Donegal and the Lower Brack, and the calendar of Taylor of Angus, Tornan lasting full of deeds and over a wide ship full of seas. Now, then we move away from the old Irish church and we move to the situation when the Normans come to Ireland, everything changes. And until 1171, Tullow had been the capital, as it says, of the Uchtfelmada Tui, the northern Uchtfelmada. In that year, the local king, MacDalbeg, made submission to King Henry II, And in 1189 to 1192, the manor of Tullow was granted to Theobald Fitzwalter by Prince John. Now the manor means not just the houses, all the grounds around it. Theobald Fitzwalter was a brother of the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was probably the most important cleric in England until Cardinal Wolsey, so many years later. Prince John, of course, is the famous prince that became King John and the Magna Carta. The Fitzwalters then became the butlers of Ormond, and of course they're still around. Now this is a very interesting map. It was done in 1656, and it's called the Down Survey Map, and it's Tullow. So if you look here, you have the town Towne, townland of Tullow Famine, townland of Tullow Famine, and then you have Tullow Church this side here, and you have Tullow Castle here. So I think Tullow Castle is where we're standing at the moment, because this church is the third church to stand on the site, and I think the other two churches are up in that direction. So then you have the River Slaney along here, and down here then you have the Augustinian Abbey, which is also put in there by the Normans, and this thing called the Tuck Mill, which was a mill that they used to make wool, to make felt. So that's a very interesting. I've crossed over here, and you have Butler's Grange up there, and so on. Now, in 1680, this guy called Dinley was doing maps of Ireland all over, and our drawings in this sketch of Tullow Castle, which was built when shortly after the Normans arrived in 1185. The first castle was probably wooden on a hill. Now, if you notice, you can see all the gables there, and you can see the wall here, and various sections in this black place here. It possibly would have been the result of a fire, I don't know. And look at the wall outside today, isn't it very similar? The road to Hackettstown. And this is John Murphy's impression of what the castle looked at from another angle. And you can see the various gables there and so on, and the tower and the wall. I'll just go back to the original drawing, and you can see where he got the inspiration. Now, medieval Tullow, when the Normans arrived, that was the first thing that Tullow actually became a town. Previously then it was a crossing point at the river and a monastic place, and now it becomes a Norman town. And in 1285 it was granted borough status. It had a corporation. It was a market town. It had Irish, English and Welsh inhabitants. It had a church, a castle, it had water mills, fishing weirs, houses for burgesses. They were the important city, the important people that had voting rights and so on. Dwellings for cottagers, workshops for carpenters, masons, tailors, dyers, and even a goldsmith. And through that time, 1303, 1344, and 1357, it got Newridge wall, so it may have been walled. This tomb, Dinley also sketched it, and it was actually in the churchyard here. There's a tomb a burn monument, and the date here, I think, is something, I think it's 1625, and it has the instruments for the Passion of Christ on the tomb. I don't think it's any longer there. Now, St. Columba's Church may have been part of St. Martin's monastic site. It's the original parish church was here, and was rebuilt in the 1530s and again in 1737. And the present church was built 1830-31 on the site of the castle, and the architect was Thomas Cobden, very famous. Did a lot of buildings in Carlow as well. They spire of the Catholic Church here in Tullow. Now, pre-Reformation clergy in this church, the earliest recorded vicar was Geoffrey de Columba, 1300. The rector was Edmund Butler, he must have been one of the butlers, 1323. 1342, Richard Eccleshall, a royal clerk, was appointed to hold the rectory of St. Columba. Now, the Reformation comes, and in the late 1530s, Archbishop Browne was appointed to speed up the English Reformation in Carlow, in Ireland. St. Columba's had Reverend Thomas Clinch as his first rector for the Reformed faith, and another source gives the date, 1546 with Robert Johns replacing Gerald McMurtagh as rector. Then you had a Gaelic resurgence in the 1300s. Edward Bruce from Scotland invaded Ireland and was crowned king. I think he was defeated and executed the following year. 1316, David O'Toole attacked Tullow and was repelled, and 400 heads of his followers were sent to Dublin. 1435, Tullow then fell to the O'Byrnes, and basically it was in the control of the O'Byrnes and the Gaels up to about 1532 when Pete's Butler regained Tullow. Cromwellian times. The 1640s and 50s, the castle became embroiled in the military upheavals of the time. 1642, the Catholic landowners, both Old English and Gaelic, formed an alliance and a quasi-parliamentary assembly known as the Confederation of Kilkenny. And Tullow Castle was first taken by Confederate forces and then captured by Cromwellian with military under Colonel Houston. And he was the guy that also captured Castlemore Castle. Now we jump back again to 1314 and we talk about St. Austin's Abbey, which is down far end of the town. And this was land that was granted by Hugh Talon. Consisted of a house, 3 acres of land in the ancient village of St. John, which we call Templeone. Another founder was Simon Lombard. Lombard provided the money, and I think he came from Lombardy in Italy. Talon died in the abbey as a friar. So that was 1314. And you see, these orders that came to Ireland replaced the old Irish monastic system. They were basically orders that came from the continent of Europe through England, although Dermot McMurray and various people had actually brought them in, some of them in before the Normans came. But this 1314, so you're talking about maybe 150 years or something since the Normans arrived. And again, there's nothing left of the abbey. Now, the Augustinian friaries, these are the ones of all over Ireland. You can see Tullow there. The one in Clonmiles, which is in Wexford, was built at the same time, 1314, and the whole life in there, and quite a lot of them in the west of Ireland, as you can see. Now, the Reformation again affected the abbey. It was dissolved in 1541 as part of Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries in Britain and Ireland. Its church and buildings were stated to be suitable and necessary for defence as they stand on the confines of the Irish Caverners. So that if you go to Caverners, they use the abbey for defence. Now, it may have looked like this. Again, John McMurphy gave me this. The survey at the time said it had an abbey, had a church, a belfry, a dormitory, 3 chambers and a kitchen, and 44 acres of arable land in Tullow and 60 acres of land in Mallardstown. Now Mallardstown, I think, is in Crosslow. Part of this abbey was at Tullowbeg, also known as Tullow or the Friars Hill. On the 13th of December 1557, the site and its buildings, along with the goods and chattels of the friary, were granted by Queen Elizabeth to James, Earl of Ormond. That's the site of the Augustinian. The Augustinians stayed around for a couple of hundred years afterwards. They were there in the 1700s, and there was a cottage there that was owned by Tony Gahan, and that was a cottage that they lived in, and that's the site now at the moment where it used to stay. And when the Close were doing the building on the house, came across this, covered in behind the wall, came across this old fireplace, which seemingly comes from the 1500s. So they've incorporated it into one of the houses that are there. Now, archaeological work is being done in the vicinity of the abbey because they're putting in new waterworks there because we need extra water with all the people in Tullow. And that's a photograph taken in 2024. And there's my good wife. There's Turtle Bunbury. And there is Paddy Dunn, who is the guy in charge of the dig. And you can see some of the sorts of stuff that they got there, millstones there, and corn drying kiln. You can see the black side where there were fires going there for the corn and blackened the stones there. And there's all these houses that they came across, which they reckon, were the people that worked in the abbey. Probably have called it a friary, but everybody in Tullow calls it an abbey. Now, this is what they had dug on up at this stage, and I couldn't put it online or anywhere because they haven't written the report yet. They found the Bronze Age hut, medieval mud wall, the abode, annexes and porches, sandstone fragments, and other chips of pottery. They would have come from France. Corn drying kiln, charred granite rocks and millstones, stone-lined furnace taken away for study, other shapes, layers, ditches, gullies, and lazy beds. Now, they had a ceremony to mark the 700th anniversary of the Augustinians in Tullow. That this was actually in 2015, it should have been 2014. There's Father Andy, parish priest at the time, who gave the plaque, and there's a real Augustinian, Father David Kelly, from John Lay, whatever, the archivist of the Augustinians in Tullow. So Augustinians are very important, really. And there's another Augustinian. Now, we jump back again, 1170. Now we're going to go to Castlemore. Raymond le Gros, he married Basilia. Basilia was the sister of, Sonbo, Richard de Clare. And Raymond le Gros arrived in Ireland in 1170. He was granted the barony of Forth, which is out around Castlemore, and he built the castle at Castlemore, and in 1190 he died. Now that's where the castle was, that's the top of the hill there, so it would have been a wooden castle there, and it would have been built up in clay and so on up to there, and the castle was there for controlling it. And the only thing that's left out around there, apart from that site where the castle was, is Laymanay graveyard, so there it is there. And there was a church there which was called Maxillan on that land. And this was found there in that church. It was a drawing. This guy who did the Ordnance Survey, one of the O'Donnell's team, did this drawing in 1839. And it's now on the top, that slab is now on the top of the moat up there. 31 we actually found it there. Now this is a map of the village as it was then, a village that disappeared. It was called Fotherett. Now I always thought that Grange Ford was meant, there was a ford there. No, it's Grange Fotherett. So this is a map now of that area. So that's the moat that I showed you about there. That's the graveyard there. Cannon's Quarter is here. Cornwall there, that's the River Slaney. And this is the road there going out along towards Carlow. This is the parish of Grange Ford here, Grange Fotherett. And there was a townland there, the father who were tried there as well. Cannon's Quarter used to say things like it was the cannons from Cromwell and all that. It was actually the cannons of St. Thomas's in Dublin. And that was given as a present by Raymond le Gros and his wife to the canons of Dublin, St. Thomas's. Now, they've done excavations out there, but this is geophysical. And you can actually see the old village that disappeared. You can actually see the walls of the houses that were along there. And the only thing that's left, as I say, is the graveyard and the moat there. But it was quite a substantial village in its time, and it disappeared around 1314, 1500. And when they did excavate, they found a lot of pottery there in the field there, Leinster cooking-ware. Now, all the local monastic sites there in the Norman times were attached to places in Dublin and so on. So I mentioned them there. Ardriston and Roscat was linked to the hospitallers of St. John the Baptist of Dublin. Ardine was a church graveyard out there. The Abbey of St. Thomas in Dublin. Ballin Temple to the Knights Templar. Castlemore, as I mentioned, the Abbey of St. Thomas. Grange and Grange Ford, a Cistercian Abbey in Baltinglass, and Killery to the Knights Hospitallers in Jerusalem. And St. Austin's Abbey in Tullow is, of course, Augustinian. Now, then we come on to the Battle of the Boyne and all that stuff. Glorious Revolution, 1688, William was replaced King James as Thomas, and then there was a load of Williamite victories, Siege of Derry, 1689, the Battle of the Boyne, the Siege of Athlone, the Battle of Aughrim, and the Sieges of Limerick. When the government felt completely, shall we say, threatened by papal recognition of the Stuarts eventually went to Rome, and a series of penal laws against Catholicism or the growth of Catholicism were brought in, in 1695, 97, 1704, 1709, 1727, and papal recognition of the Catholic Stuarts' claim to the throne mainly resulted in these measures against Catholics who were regarded as having at best divided allegiance. So you had a situation where the Catholic religion was basically banned, and you had people going to mass rocks, and there's a mass rock out at Waste Grass. So you can see there a heart, IHS, cross, place for our relics there as well, and that's on Moore's Grand Band out in Waste Grass. There's the late Garrett Moore pointing out where it used to be. It's in a different spot than it is now. Then you had a penal law chapel here in Tullow. It's in Mill Street at the back of Dr. Bulger's place, and it was replaced in 1805, and it became the first Patrician monastery. At that stage, they put in windows and made a house out of it. Bishop at the time was living in Tullow. His name was James Keefe, from 1702 to 89. And he lived and this place in Knocknaturville as well. That was his house. And eventually, when he died, he's buried in the old graves in Carlow. His grave there. When he was in Tullow, he had to keep a very, very low profile, and he used to get his letters written top James Keefe, shopkeeper Tullow, and collected them from the local shop. And when he was writing, he said, wrote in Latin, of course, in Dalton in Lochlan Refugee Nostros, which was as late as 1775, it was given from our place of refuge. Now, things began to improve. This was the home of Thomas, this is Boris' house, home was Thomas Kavanagh, and Bishop Keefe and 10 other diocesan priests took an oath of allegiance to King George there in 1775, which meant that the pressure came off. At that stage, of course, the Kavanaghs were Catholics. Now, the bishop that replaced Bishop Keefe was Daniel Delaney, and this is a portrait by Nathaniel Holden the Elder. Bishop Delaney was born in Paddock, County Laois, attended a head school there, ordained 70 or 71 in the Irish College in Paris, returned to Ireland, stationed in Tullow, and was appointed coadjutor bishop in Tullow 1783. Now, he was writing about Tullow's population at the time. They were the most wretchedly poor, absolutely the lowest and meanest condition, with the exception of a small number of individuals in middling circumstances. Now, Bishop Delaney lived out, this is his residence out there where Charlie Moore is at the moment, Tullow Lodge. That's the house there, and that would have been his chapel. You can see the Gothic window there, and you can see the ceiling, the way it's arranged. He built two churches, one in Tullow and one in Mountrath, and that was replaced in Mountrath, and of course Tullow has changed a good lot in the meantime as well. It was built in 1805 and the steeple was added in 1833. Now, he was there for all the 98 bothered here in Tullow, and this is a letter that was from Bishop Caulfield of Ferns to Archbishop Troy of Dublin. Of course, we must remember that the bishops were very much against the 1798 rising, and Father Murphy, in fact, would have been suspended priest. I have been told by one of the Carlow students that he, meaning Bishop Delaney, was in a miserable way. His chapel, which we saw, is filled with soldiers or horses, himself often insulted, could not venture home, but remained in town with Miss Brown, I mentioned her again, and was much emaciated. However, he writes in good spirits that his chapel is free now, The yeomanry in that quarter had killed at least 100 of the united wretches. Now, these are more 1798. This is out at Ardriston. This is the local United Irishmen executed here. William Kelly, and this one is great, is the three Marr brothers, and Tom O'Connor rested the plaque to them. And when the three Marr brothers were killed, they were part of the Battle of Carlow, which was more or less the massacre of Carlow. The mother went over and she planted 3 trees, and I went over to the Croppy grave and I see 3 butts of trees there. I don't know whether the same ones or not in their memory. And other local Irish, local Tullow people are in the area that were, of the days. William Kelly, William Murphy of Tullow, they were executed, and the brothers, Michael and Thomas Larder from Ardriston. Now, I think most of those actually were in the yeoman, but they would have taken the Irish oath, and they probably would have been found out and executed. Father Murphy, of course, was executed in 1798 in July, and that's that was given to me by Joe Kay. The oldest photograph of Tullow, 1866. So Father Murphy would have been executed down here. That was owned by the O'Callaghan family at the time, the business people at the time, and I suppose the 1798 would be in the memory of some people, but certainly of those people it would be in the memory of their parents. This is a weighing scale you can see there for the market. And it's very interesting to see General Merkel establishment there on top. The people of Tullow were very, very poor, as I saw earlier, and also uneducated, and lots of social problems, which Bishop Delaney felt that the answer was basically learning and moral teaching with religious. So he started the early Sunday schools, and he had a lot of adults trained to teach them, but it didn't quite work out. People were leaving and so on, so he wanted something more permanent. So eventually he formed the Brigidine Sisters and the Patrician Brothers. They were the first Brigidine Sisters, 1807. They're Eleanor Talon, Eleanor Dawson, Catherine Doyle, Judith Queen, Bridget Brown, Margaret Hinter. They were all local people, and I think Eleanor Talon was from Castlemore. And these are all local as well, except one of them, Patrick McMahon. I think he was from Limerick somewhere, but Cummins, Fitzpatrick, and Dawson, they were local guys who became the first brothers just a year later. What's her name here? Judith Rogan Brown, 1756 to 1748. She's buried in the convent. She was born in Castlemore, County Kildare, and she was the mentor of the first Brigidine Sisters because she had been educated. Her aunts were nuns, and the family of the Browns were very famous in the Battle of the Boyne and so on. They're cousins of the Talbots from Malahide, and I think it was something like 7 brothers of the Talbots of Malahide sat down to breakfast one morning and went up and fought in the Battle of the Boyne, and all 7 of them were killed. So she was influential in 4 bishops of Kildare and Loughlin, and she had supported the establishment of Chain Convent also in County Kildare, and she died in Tullow Convent and is buried in the grounds. The basically Patrician and church complex that developed mainly through the 19th century. You can see the church there, you can see the convent all this side here, the convent has primary school here, the boarding school is there, then you have the Patrician monastery here, Patrician secondary school here, and this was the novitiate for young ladies becoming nuns, and of course then they also won Mount Wolseley at the same time. St. Columba's School, James W.C. Doyne, 1851-78, was a serious benefactor of the school. The Wolseleys now we come on to. The Wolseley family came originally from Staffordshire. This is where they're buried. The vault is just out the back of this church. The motto for the Wolseley family is Homo hominis lupus, which means man is wolf to man. William Wolseley from Staffordshire fought with King William at the Battle of the Boyne, and Mount Wolseley was purchased by Sir Charles Wolseley from Sir Charles Butler, Earl of Arran, after 1720. Now, Richard mentioned that very famous plaque that's here to Neville, and Neville's mother was a sister of the Wolseleys. He was very important in the Battle of the Boyne, and that was made 1745, so it was actually in the other church. It was brought from the other church to here. The Wolseleys, of course, that was their house in Mount Wolseley. The actual house that they had was the other side of the road, and then it was burnt down during 1798. I'll just read you an account, I will in just a moment, of Garnet Wolseley, who I'll talk about now. Now, these are some of the most famous of the Wolseleys. Sir Garnet Wolseley was born in Golden Bridge, Dublin, and he was Commander-in-Chief of British forces from 1875 to 1901. He served in Crimea, Burma, China, India, Ghana, South Africa, and Egypt, and he's basically the guy that modernised the British Army, and he was extremely important. He wrote his biography, and about 1798 he wrote this. In some amusing letters to her people in England, my grandmother describes the sudden approach of the rebels and the panic which ensued, for there seemed bent upon ridding Ireland of at least one family of hated Saxon settlers. Everyone ran, some on horseback, others in wheeled vehicles they could secure, all making for Carlow, about 9 miles off, where there was a small English garrison. A very plain aunt, to whom as a boy I was very much attached, was forgotten in the hurry and confusion. Finding that she had been left behind, she set off on foot, and being soon overtaken by a yeomanry trooper, we kindly took her up behind him. She did very well until about halfway to Carlow, when unfortunately for her, they overtook a very pretty girl, out of breath and much frightened. The trooper said she was a cousin, and insisted upon my ugly aunt giving her place behind him to his handsome kinswoman. My poor aunt had to finish her flight on foot. Not content with burning our house, being short of ammunition, they stripped the church spire of its lead, and also smelted into bolts the leaden coffin where my great-grandfather had been recently buried. So all sorts of interesting things happening in those days. Now, the other very famous, the amount of Wolseleys that are so famous is unbelievable. This guy, Frederick Wolseley, he emigrated to Australia in 1865. He's probably another guy. With Herbert Austin, he invented the first mechanical sheep shearing machine in Australia in 1876. The production moved to Birmingham in the UK, and in 1895, Austin designed the first Wolseley motor car. So, he was actually buried in England, and it's an unmarked grave. And the Wolseley Association of Car Drivers actually put up a headstone over him in fairly relatively recent years. Now, this is St. Columba's Church where we are, and of course, you can see the glass window there is completely different from this one. And you notice the oil lamps there, that the lectern is the same, much of the same here. But it's very interesting. Now, that window there was donated by the Wolseleys. The east window, as the church, represents Christ imparting the Sermon on the Mount, and the inscription reads, dedicated to the glory of God, in loving memory of our father, Sir John Richard Wolseley, Baronet of Mount Wolseley, died 20th of June 1874, and of our fondly devoted, loved and devoted mother, Frances Annabella, his wife, died in May 1907. And then there's another lovely stained glass window over there that Richard mentioned. The wall depicts two scenes from the life of St. John the Baptist. The The first shows St. John Baptist preaching, while the second shows his execution and the maidservant waiting with a platter for his head. The inscription reads, "To the glory of God, memory of John Richard Wolseley, Baronet, born on the feast of St. John the Baptist, June 24, 1834, died June 20, 1874, age 40. This window is erected with tribute to affection by his loving mother, Alice E. Wolseley." So, and of course there are lots of other plaques as well. Clement Wolseley there, and this one over here. And I think that this one, Clement Wolseley there as well. Now, this is 1849. 1845. Now, this is Dr. Diane Snowden outside Tullow Courthouse there. Tullow Courthouse is supposed to have been made, or Tullow Barracks, with the stones from either the castle or the abbey or both. The barracks was actually a cavalry barracks because it was near the river, because you need for the horses. And this woman is a descendant of 5 people who were transported to Australia for stealing potatoes, 1845, the cusp of the famine. Their names were Esther Burgess, 39, a farm servant, washerwoman, a widow with 7 surviving children. Mary Burgess, 14, a country servant and eldest child of Esther. Margaret Butler, the ancestor of that Dr. Snowden, 40, from a servant, farm servant, a widow with 6 children. Mary Griffin, 32, from the over the county boundary in Wicklow, house servant, married 3 children, with a husband in America. Mary Byrne, 30, a farm servant, unmarried, mother of a 2-year-old child. Also on board the ship bringing them to Tasmania was Eliza Davis, an orphan from Dublin's Famine Hospital, who had been apprenticed as a farm worker to a family in Cronley House in the neighbouring parish of Shillelagh. And like this woman, Diane Snowden, has done tremendous research and written a book about her ancestors and how well some of them did and how others didn't do so well, but it's very interesting. And that's her grandchildren there, and that guy there is Rowan Gillespie, who was a sculptor for the Famine statues on the quays in Dublin near Point Depot, and her grandchildren were used as models for those statues. And she had great difficulty getting the little girl to look sad. She was also happy. Now, the famine in 1846, we're inclined to think it all went on the west, but there was quite an awful lot of problems around it in County Carlow and in Tullow. 29th of May 1846, the Reverend J.B. Johnston, established church rector, told the chief secretary's office that there were in Tullow electoral area 250 men in need of employment. He gave them 2 months' work at 10 pence per day, £500 would be required, and there were 400 individuals unable to work, of whom 50 might be admitted to the workhouse. What would be done with the remaining 350? And in Tullow, £250 was collected from the clergy and the landowners. Committees sanctioned by Lord Duncannon, Lieutenant of the county, received grants from the government equal to about 2/3 of the amount subscribed. Those qualified for government assistance were Tullow, Bagenalstown, Packetstown, Kilkenny and Boris. Under the scheme, £75 was paid in lowering the 3 hills on the road from Loughlin Bridge to Tullow, and a new road at Ballon past the school cost of £400 to avoid the hill. That's the workhouse in Carlow. It's built for 800 and eventually it was 10,000 people being fed from it. And the population of Tullow went down considerably in those years, between deaths and illness, not so much from hunger. And a lot of people went into the workhouse because they had no clothes, because they used to pawn their clothes for the week and then get them back at the end of the week. But they weren't able to do it because they couldn't afford it to get them back. So it was clothes and so on. Anyway, go on now to Landley, Charles Stewart Parnell, Freeman's Jordan on the 29th of September 1879. There was a meeting in Tullow the day before, and it was addressed by Penal, and reports an estimated 15,000 people were present. 1880, the first Carlow branch of the Land League was established in Tullow, and from October 1881 to January 1882, Land League activists were arrested, including Daniel Lennon, hotelier and publican, Gerald O'Toole, merchant, and James J. White, hotelier. We're going on to the Great War now. These are the war graves in the Tullow area, and this is Thomas Corcoran of Kill, and he's buried in the Mullan grave called St. Bridget. These three are in the Abbey graveyard, site of the Augustinian Abbey. Michael Riley of Bagnallstown, John Cosgrove of Tullabeg Street, and William Byrne of Tullabeg Street, and at least 64 from the Tullow people, Tullow parish, were killed during World War I, including this man, Captain William Murphy, killed in Gonsheet in the Battle of the Somme, September 1916. And he was from a famous family in Tullow that had a huge amount of business interests in the town. And well, he was a leader of the assault on Gonsheet. I think it was the Bavarians that they were attacking. He was killed. The guy, the second in command, was Thomas Kettle, famous Irish politician, barrister, and pharmacist. He was killed. And the guy that took over was Emmett Dalton, who was only 18 years at the time when he captured the hill, and for that he got the Military Cross. Armistice Day, 1919. Colonel Leckie and the Abbey grounds, and these are the 1920s, Remembrance Sunday then. And that area there, you have young boys wearing their father's medals that they would have been killed. This is Colonel Leckie here, I think that's Captain Adair, this one here. This is the RIC station in Tullow, which is at the site of the present Guard station. It was a single-storey building in those days, and you can see the RIC man outside of there, and probably his family there as well, I suppose. And there was two constables killed on the 8th of September 1920. This is the guard or the constables at the RIC station here, and it's on that little island there. Finn's garage around there as well, and the Aldi and so on up this way. The Church of Ireland School, St. Columbus is there. So along that road, there was no parking road, Dublin Road at the time. Along that road, about 100 yards up, a group of RIC men were basically challenged by the IRA to hand over their arms, and they produced them, and two of them were shot dead and one was injured. This is the report that went to the IRA headquarters in Dublin of what happened. There's a map of all, where everybody was along there, and the names of all the people that were involved. As a reprisal, next day, group of RICs and Black and Tans basically attacked the town of Tullow and tried to burn down. They actually burned down Murphy's, which is now Griffin's, burned it completely down, and they basically tried to, I think they'd gone to the Irish bar beforehand and to get tanked up and removed alcohol from it, and they broke a lot of windows and doors and so on into town, and the place would have been completely burnt, only that the fire brigade was able to get help from the fire brigade over in Carlow, came over with Govan's lorry. They actually thought the next day it was going to happen again, so the Tullow people all went to houses out in the countryside. They thought it was going to happen again. And in reprisal for the deaths of Constable Govan, Constable Delaney, and serious injury of Constable Houlihan, who had this destruction. This is one of the men who were killed, and that headstone is out in Grange, and it's only appeared in recent times. And the guy that John Gohan would have been from the mid-Gaeltacht. Then we come on to the Civil War, and Tullow was in the hands of the Republican forces for a while and then captured by the National Army. This man on the left is Ernie O'Malley. This man here is Emmett Dalton. Both were involved in the IRA. This guy here had been in the Royal Dublin Fusiliers under Captain Murphy, and when he came back in 1990, he joined the IRA in the War of Independence. They would have known one another because they would have gone to the same school. They would have had meetings in Dublin, and so they knew one another very well. When the 28th of June 1922, the Civil War began in Dublin, and the Republican forces took over the four courts, he was there. Eventually, artillery got them out of the four courts, and they then came down in the direction to Blessington, Baltinglass, Tullow, Enniscorthy, all those places, and took them over. And then Emmett Dalton then came down after them, and they left Baltinglass, they came to Tullow, and then I think it was the National Army took over Baltinglass, and they sent an airplane down from Baldon, which flew over Tullow to see what was the story. And it ended out that the story was that the place had gone quiet because the Republicans had actually left the town. So the National Army was able to come in. And people were very relieved because they expected a bloodbath. Now, this is the Khan family. They were a Jewish family who lived in Tullow, they're business people. This is Fitzgerald's house, and they lived here and had a garage there. But they also had a big shop where Fitzgerald had a shop in Mill Street as well. As you can see, mainly girls and one boy, Joseph. One of the girls is called Rachel, and she wrote a wonderful article in the Own magazine about what it was like during the Civil War and how her father used to have to give shoes to both sides as according as one side or other took over the town. And when they ran out of size 8, that had to be put up at size 9, 10 or whatever it was. And very, very interesting. One of the girls who worked for them and previously, of course, had her hair cut for fraternising with some of the British armies in previous time as well. But they left during the war. They would be related to Ben Briscoe, who was a famous Fianna Fáil Lord Mayor of Dublin. When the Republican forces actually had been in the Abbey House, they took it over. This is where the Doynes lived. So they took it over, and then they left, and the National Army took in there. And when the National Army left, the Republicans burnt it down, so that was burning afterwards. This is built by Charles Henry Doyne in the 1850s. The Doynes left Tullow a few years before the outbreak of the War of Independence, and St. Austin's was occupied National Army forces in 1922. Once the National Army had left the anti-treaty forces, the Republican forces burnt it down. And it's now total ruin and overgrown by Thomas Traynor, famous patriot. He was born in Tullow in 1882. He was involved in the 1916 Goldman's Mill under Emily Riviera, and he was executed for his part in an event in Great Brunswick Street, which is now Peel Street, in 1921. And they were reinterred in reinterred for Rotten 10 in Glasnevin. And that's his grave in Glasnevin there. And the flag that was on his coffin was given by his granddaughter, Paddy Hickey, at the 2010 annual commemoration of Thomas Traynor. A few other things about Tullow. Now, it's not all warfare. The farming, we had a creamery here, a rope factory, flax and so on. We had a railway station, branch line 1886 to 1959. We had a famous sportsman, Jim O'Donnell, national marathon champion in 1935, coming into the railway station there. And the first golf pavilion, golf club, was in 1928. and it was basically sold or given away during the Second World War because government insisted that all land had to be sown. Father John Humphrey brass band, early part of the 20th century. Tullow Fire Station there, you can see Tom Dunn and various people, Patsy Callan, Paddy Marr, Tom Dunn, Bill Doyle, Larry Doyle, Phil Callahan, Jim Don Doyle. Now, sum up the whole lot. Margaret Murphy, who is now regarded as the expert on Tullow, she wrote a wonderful article in Carlow, History and Society. She summed up Tullow, she says, Tullow has a long history stretching back to at least the 6th century. However, its origins as a town lie squarely in the Anglo-Norman period. No doubt it was at this time, like countless other Irish towns, a tool in the hands of colonisers, a means of pacifying territory and opening the land to economic exploitation. The documents reveal, however, that Tullow and its region have always been characterised by ethnic, cultural and religious diversity. The people who came to settle in Tullow in the 13th century and the indigenous population were incorporated into the manor and borough, sharing many traits, not least of which was resilience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christy, for that most interesting lecture. A huge amount of work gone into preparing this lecture for us this evening. So we're indebted to Christy and thank him for the preparation and the delivery of an excellent lecture. If there are any questions, we might take a couple of questions. So has anyone got any? Yes, Paddy.
How are you doing? Thank you very, very much for your lecture. It was illuminating. I live close to a place called Bullring, and around there, I believe there was another, just a couple of years behind me, near Canada, was a medieval church, possibly owned by a Norman knight. I'm just wondering, you wouldn't know anything about that by any chance? Ballyhacket would be the town land? No?
I don't know anything about it, but it's probably possible to find out.
Yeah.
You know, because there was an amazing number of churches that were everywhere, and they're just heaps of stone at the moment, a lot of them, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah. Charlie.